My sister never meant for me to see that photo. It came to my phone a little after 10. At night, with no message, no smiley face, no explanation, just one bright picture dropped into my private messages like a mistake from heaven. At first, I almost ignored it. I was tired, sitting on my couch with a blanket over my knees, still wearing the same blouse I had worn through a 12-hour day of tracing other people's missing money. Then I tapped the picture, and there was my father, Harold Waverly, laughing at the head of a long white table in one of those restaurants where they bring tiny food on huge plates and charge enough to make a retired person choke. My mother Marjorie sat beside him in pearls. My brother Grant had a glass raised. My sister Celine was leaning in with her husband like they belonged in a magazine. A birthday cake sat in front of Dad, tall and perfect. Everyone was there, everyone but me. And behind my father's elbow, just barely in the picture, was an open receipt folder with a black credit card sitting on top. I zoomed in, and the name on that card broke 9 years of my life into pieces. Before I tell you what I saw, you need to know what I had believed. I am Ellen Waverly, 58 years old, and for 9 years I sent my parents $2,400 every single month because they told me they were barely surviving. My father said his supply business had collapsed. My mother cried about medical bills, late notices, and stress that was taking years off his life. They never begged directly. They were smarter than that. They simply let me hear the fear in their voices until I offered. I set up an automatic transfer because that is what a good daughter does when her parents are drowning. At least, that is what I told myself. I put off replacing my car. I delayed buying the small lake cottage I had dreamed about since my 40s. I skipped trips with friends, worked extra cases, and told myself love sometimes looks like sacrifice. If you have ever carried a family problem so long that you forgot it was never supposed to be yours, keep listening, because this is the part where the truth starts breathing. The lie worked because it started with a little truth. Dad's company really had taken a hit. The first bill they showed me was real. The fear in my mother's voice may have been real at the beginning, but the best lies do not need to be fake from the first word. They only need to stay alive after the truth has died. For years, whenever I offered to sit down and review their finances, Mom stopped me with that soft voice older daughters know too well. "Honey, you already do enough. You're the only one we can count on." That sentence made me feel loved. It made me feel important. It also kept me quiet. A woman who believes she is the only beam holding up the house does not ask why no one else is lifting. She just keeps standing there while her back breaks. So there I sat that night, staring at the photo Celine had sent by accident. The receipt showed a dinner total so high it made my hands cold. Several bottles of wine, a private room charge, a tasting menu. This was not one careful birthday treat. This was luxury without shame. Then I zoomed harder on the card, and there it was, Harold M. Waverly, printed across a black premium card my father had never mentioned. Not a struggling man's card, not a man choosing between pills and groceries. Not the card of someone who needed his daughter's $2,400 to make it through the month. 2 weeks earlier, he had sighed into the phone and told me, things are still tight, Ellie." He said it while that card was sitting in his wallet. That was the moment the daughter in me went silent, and the forensic bookkeeper in me woke up. I did not call. I did not scream. I did not send the picture back with a question mark, like a wounded fool begging to be lied to again. I made coffee at 2 a.m. and opened my laptop. First, I pulled my own bank records. Every transfer was there, neat and loyal. $2,400 a month for 9 years, 108 payments. Then I searched the business records. Dad's company had not stayed dead. It had reorganized under a slightly different name 7 years earlier and had been active ever since. Next, I looked for the medical debt Mom had cried about. No liens, no collections, no public sign of the disaster she had described. Then I searched property records, and that is where the last excuse in me died. 3 years earlier, while I was driving a car with duct tape on the seat and telling myself my parents needed me, they had bought a vacation condo in Savannah, paid in cash. If you are listening with your jaw tight right now, Drop a comment because some betrayals do not scream. They sit quietly in county records and wait for you to find them. The final number was $259,200. I stared at it on my spreadsheet until it stopped looking like money and started looking like years. That was the cottage I never bought, the trips I never took, the peace I kept postponing, the emergency fund I kept draining, for people eating $650 plates without inviting me. And then another truth hit me even harder. I had not simply been used. No, I had been hidden. There was a family group chat I had never been added to. Dinners had been planned there, cruises discussed there, photos shared there. For 9 years, they kept me close enough to collect from, and far enough away not to see how they lived. I was family when the transfer cleared. I was nobody when the table was set. I needed one human witness, so I called Aunt Rosalind, my father's sister, a woman who could never keep a secret if it had handles. I acted casual and asked how Dad's birthday dinner went. She told me everything. The wine, the private room, how Harold had been living well lately, how he and Mom were talking about another cruise. Then she paused and said, "Ellen, honey, you stopped helping them years ago, right?" I closed my eyes. There it was. The extended family thought my parents were doing beautifully on their own money. My father had been taking my sacrifice in private and wearing it in public like his own success. I told Aunt Rosalind the truth. The silence on her end was the first honest thing I had heard from a Waverly in years. 2 weeks later, my mother invited me to my father's official 69th birthday dinner at that same restaurant. I knew why. I had canceled the automatic transfer, and Dad had noticed within 4 days. Funny how a man barely surviving can detect a missing $2,400 faster than a bank auditor. He called it a glitch. Mom called it stress on his heart. Grant texted me not to upset the family. That told me he knew enough to be guilty. I played calm. I said I would be there. Then I made folders, cleaned copies, business filings, property records, transfer totals, a summary page with 3 sections: what I was told, what was true, and what it cost me. I did not prepare a speech. I prepared evidence. Because I have learned one thing in life. When people depend on your silence, the most dangerous thing you can do is become organized. I arrived late on purpose, so the room was full. My father stood and hugged me like a king, welcoming a useful subject back to court. My mother smiled too brightly. Celine would not meet my eyes. Grant looked at his plate. Aunt Rosalind gave me one small nod that nearly broke me. I sat down, placed my bag by my chair, and waited. Dessert came. Dad stood with his glass and began his favorite performance. He talked about hard years, family strength, and how the Waverlys always pulled through. Then he said, with that tired, noble voice I knew too well, "Things have been tight, but we always find a way." Tight. He said tight in front of a cake, private wine, and a room I had helped pay for but had never been allowed to enter. So I stood up. I kept my voice gentle because a calm truth cuts deeper than a loud accusation. I said, "Since Dad brought up the hard years, I think everyone should know who paid for them." Then I opened the folder and laid the first page on the white tablecloth. I explained that for 9 years I had sent my parents $2,400 a month because I had been told the business had failed, medical debt was crushing them, and they were barely surviving. I laid down the business record showing the company active for 7 years. I laid down the search results showing no medical debt. I laid down the deed for the Savannah condo purchased in cash. Then I laid down the spreadsheet, pointed to the total, and said, $259,200. That is what your tight years cost me. The table went dead silent. My father's face turned gray, then red. He shouted that I was humiliating him, that I was selfish, that I had always wanted attention. There was the insult. Not shame for what he had done. Not sorrow for what he had taken. Just anger that I had exposed it where his audience could see. He grabbed at the papers like a guilty man trying to scoop smoke back into a fire. I let him. I had copies. My mother began to cry and reached for the old spell. "You are the only one we could count on," she whispered. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, her tears did not move my hand toward my checkbook. I said, "You're right, Mom. I was the only one you could count on. You just made sure I was also the only one who paid." That line ended something in the room. My mother admitted it started as a real need, then got better, then went too far. She said they did not know how to stop without confessing. I believed that part, but I also knew the difference between a mistake and a monthly choice. 108 times they let me pay. 108 times they let me believe they were drowning while they were cruising, dining, and buying property. I told the whole table the transfers were finished forever. I told them I was not suing, though any lawyer could smell the fraud from the sidewalk. I was not there to chase money already spent. I was there to remove the lie from the room. Then I paid for my own meal, because I would not let my father buy me dinner with my own stolen sacrifice even one more time. I picked up my purse, looked at him, and said, "Happy birthday." Then I walked out. Aunt Rosalind followed me to the sidewalk and cried harder than my mother had. She said she was sorry. She said none of them knew. She said I had done the right thing. That was enough. Not because it fixed anything, but because someone finally saw me without asking me to pay for the privilege. After that night, my father stopped calling. Silence is the last little throne a proud man sits on after the truth takes the big one away. My mother calls sometimes, carefully, with no talk of money. Celine sent a long apology that mostly explained how bad she felt about the photo, which told me she still thinks the mistake was sending it, not hiding me for 9 years. Grant said nothing, and that told me everything. The $2,400 now stays with me. Within a year, I bought the lake cottage I had postponed for nearly a decade. It is small, quiet, and fully mine. My name is the only name on the deed. Some mornings, I sit on the porch with coffee and think about the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant never checking the math. I do not hate her. She was loyal. She was generous. She was just trained to confuse being needed with being loved. So if you take one thing from my story, take this. Love your family, but do not hand them your blindness as proof. People who truly love you will not fear your questions. They will not need you left out of the room to keep the money coming. And if a photo ever lands in your messages by mistake, zoom in. Sometimes the truth is sitting right there on the table. Commentary, discussion, explanation, and lessons. Now let's slow down and talk about what really happened in this story, because this was not just a story about money. This was a story about trust, family pressure, emotional control, and the painful moment when someone finally checks the truth for herself. Ellen was not a cold person. She was not selfish. She was the daughter who kept giving month after month because she believed her parents were in trouble. For 9 years, she built her life around helping them. She delayed her dreams, skipped comfort, and carried a burden that was never fully hers. The most painful part is not only that her parents took the money, the deeper pain is that they let her believe a false story for almost a decade. They allowed her to feel responsible for their survival while they were enjoying expensive dinners, private trips, and even a vacation condo. That is what makes this betrayal so hard. They did not just use her bank account. They used her love. They knew Ellen was loyal, and they used that loyalty like a tool. When Selena accidentally sent that dinner photo, it became the crack in the whole lie. One small mistake revealed what years of phone calls had hidden. Ellen did not react with loud anger. She did something stronger. She became calm. She checked records. She followed the money. She looked at business filings, property records, and her own bank transfers. This is where the story becomes powerful. Her revenge was not screaming. Her revenge was proof. The birthday dinner scene is the strongest part because Ellen gives the truth the same public stage where her father had been playing the victim. For years, he enjoyed being seen as a strong family man who had survived hard times. But Ellen showed everyone that his survival was paid for by her sacrifice. That public exposure hurt him more than any insult because it destroyed the image he had built. He could argue with feelings, but he could not argue with documents. Her mother's line, "You were the only one we could count on," shows how emotional control works. That sentence once made Ellen feel special. Later, she understood it was also a trap. Sometimes people make you feel needed so you will not notice you are being drained. Ellen's answer was perfect. She was the only one they could count on, but they made sure she was also the only one who paid. The ending is not about Ellen becoming cruel. It is about her becoming free. She does not chase revenge forever. She stops the transfer, tells the truth, walks away, and builds her own life. That is the real victory. She buys the cottage she postponed for years. She finally spends her own money on her own peace. And that is a very strong message for the audience. The lesson here is simple but deep. Love should never require blindness. Helping family is good, but honest people will not be afraid of questions. If someone makes you feel guilty every time you ask for clarity, that is a warning sign. Another lesson is that sacrifice should not erase your own life. Ellen gave from love, but she forgot to protect herself. This story reminds us that kindness needs boundaries. We also learn that truth does not always need noise. Sometimes the strongest revenge is a calm voice, a clean folder, and facts no one can deny. Ellen did not destroy her family. Their own lie did that. She simply turned on the light. The end.